So awesome. Hopefully we have some viewers on that side, and to everyone who is joining now live and in the future, we're super glad to have you. Welcome. So this is our second interview for Zero Waste Month this year. So happy October, happy Zero Waste Month. We're really excited to talk about greenwashing this time. So the last conversation that we had was for the National Zero Waste Conference, and that recording will later be made available on YouTube afterwards. And then we'll have this available on YouTube to watch. And please join us as well the following Thursdays of the month for each of our next Zero Waste Month interviews to do a deep dive into different topics like sustainable farming, e-waste, and incineration, which are hot topics in the zero waste field. To everyone who's watching live, feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat, converse with each other, introduce yourselves. Let's be, this doesn't have to be super formal. We're here to talk amongst each other. Our interviewees can also answer questions in the chat as we go. And then once we have our kind of the bulk of the conversation through, we'll also open it up for questions at the end of the conversation. So we're really excited to have you once again, and I'm going to turn it over. Well, I guess I should introduce myself. Hi, I'm Hayden Sloan, Strategic Director of Communications from Race to Zero Waste, and we are the host of Zero Waste Month in October. And now I'm going to turn it over to our interviewees to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Jennifer Wendt.
Hello, Jennifer Wendt, she, her. I have a couple jobs right now. I work for BFA Engineering, an engineering firm in Washington, Missouri on the Missouri River, and I work for MRCTI, and that's who I'm representing today. MRCTI is an association of mayors from the headwaters of the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. And we have an initiative to reduce plastic pollution along the corridor. The Mississippi River drains 40% of the continental U.S., so it's a very critical piece when it comes to ocean plastics and plastics making their way into the environment. So it's great to be here today.
Thank you, Jennifer. And next will be Kristine.
Aloha, I'm Kristine Kubat, and that QC that I am here in Hawaii. I'm the Executive Director of Recycle Hawaii. We're a legacy environmental organization that's been active here for about 34 years. And I'm going to be speaking from that kind of grassroots legacy perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kristine. And next is Ashley.
Hello, Ashley Hutz. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing at SmartSolve. So we are kind of a startup still. We started in 2016, but we manufacture water-soluble paper-based materials. So really an innovative product line. Everything in our portfolio is what's known as dissolvable. And so that's been really fun. We have just an amazing end-of-life story, and one where we envision a lot of different options for consumers. So right now there's a pretty big bend for recyclability, and it's good, and we need that infrastructure, but we're excited about end of life that looks like recyclable, or throw it away, or rinse it down your sink, or flush it. It may not be the catch-all for everything, but we think we could put a dent in some things with wider adoption. So we're really excited about the future, and I'm just so pleased to be here. So thank you, Hayden.
Thank you to our interviewees for joining us. Let me make sure I unmute myself before I start talking. All right, wonderful. Well, we're going to start with just a quick question of what is the bee in your bonnet issue on greenwashing? What is the kind of the biggest issue that you're seeing these days? And later we can get into how we can address some of those. But first, what's the bee in your bonnet these days? I'll let Ashley go first.
Thanks. Yeah, I love the question, by the way. It's pretty funny. The bee in my bonnet. No, does anyone wear bonnets anymore? Yeah, so there's a bee in my bonnet, and I was thinking about just the word biodegradability. And I think we've all agreed that this is a hard word, but I think we've given it a bad rap unnecessarily so. And let me explain. So There have been a lot of greenwashing kind of stunts around using it as everything's biodegradable, right? Something will biodegrade inevitably in about 700 years. So we cannot be putting that on packaging. However, I will say that there are tests that really legitimize that word. And so there are tests like OECD 301B, which measures how biodegradable a material is in an aqueous environment. There's also an ISO standard that says if your materials are 100% biodegradable in 30 days, it's pass or fail. And so with a material like ours that's readily biodegradable and passes ISO, it's really not a bad word, but it gets a bad rap, if you know what I'm saying. So that's something that, you know, when I say, oh, it's a readily biodegradable material, you really have to have a time frame and an environment. Otherwise, it is greenwashing. So that's something that I think is frustrating. I agree. We shouldn't be putting it on things, but without time frame or environment. So.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about making sure that it's clear to our consumers, to any consumers, about what exactly that means. And that's definitely a word that has been greenwashed. Jenny, you want to go next?
Absolutely. The bee in my bonnet is curbside recycling, specifically related to plastics. And what I mean by that is the background of how we got to where we are. I'm just going to give a really quick overview starting in 1978. Really, I will make this quick. In 1978 is when the 2-liter bottle rolled out. And I remember the commercials, how it was a savior because then you don't have breakage. And then if your 5-year-old wanted to drink soda, they could readily pick it up out of the fridge and pour themselves a glass. Well, anyway, this all went, there were all the commercials, how great it was. Then environmentalists realized, you know, now we have all this waste. So between the plastics industry, Petro, and other folks in that industry benefiting, they mandated, number one, the recycling Mobius on almost all plastics, whether they were, because as Ashley said, yeah, most everything's recyclable, but is it economically feasibly recyclable? Is it actually going to happen? That's a totally different thing. So they mandated the Mobius, and then they mandated that local government manage recycling and rolled out the curbside cart. And it sounded really good at the time, and I don't think people thought that it would end up this way. But when that rolled out, in the meantime, we were making deals with China to take all that material. And now we know that material maybe or maybe wasn't getting recycled. And eventually China said, we're tired of getting all your junk. So now we're in this state where people don't trust recycling. And we know that there's good recycling. Aluminum has been recycled forever, cardboard, and prior to the curbside container and the mandate for local government, we had mom and pop recycling out there. We took our aluminum to the aluminum recycling or the metals. We took our cardboard and paper somewhere, and that seemed to be working fine. But now local governments can't afford it. We cannot afford processing the materials domestically. The plastics that they want back to put into their bottles, that material is not clean enough for that comes out of the MRF to be put back in bottles. So it's made into carpet and things like that. So meanwhile, these the beverage companies and other packaging are saying we're going to increase our recycled content to 100%, but they don't have access to that clean material to even get it there. And then we know that it's not going to be recyclable forever. It's not an aluminum can, and it's not biodegradable. It's not all of these things. So and just to point out one thing, when this all rolled out, when the single-use beverage bottle rolled out in like the 80s and 90s, Germany took a stance and put in extended producer responsibility for packaging. And to this day, they have the best system. I mean, they reuse plastic containers. They reuse it in the case where they have plastic. They reuse glass. Everything is deposit return schemes. It's just a really great system there because they caught it at the beginning when single-use plastic started rolling out. And that's what we should have done. But now we're trying to learn from our mistakes.
Thank you for that. And that's a good historical perspective as well to bring in about recycling and kind of why we've gotten to this point where the comment in the chat, if you feel the same way, where we feel like we don't trust recycling now. And it's definitely a big issue. Kristine?
bee in my bonnet. Hey, there's a whole hive up there. And I'm going to just warn everybody that I'm really going to fixate on plastic. It's not that that's the only place where greenwashing is going on. But, this is just an alarming concern. And so my first thing I want to do is I want to recommend that everybody read this book by Matt Simon. It's called Poison Like No Other. I've been tracking this issue of plastic pollution for about 15 years. And I would say that this is the best written, best compilation of facts and citations. It's written in a way that in some ways is very easy to read, and in other ways it's just absolutely horrifying. And once you read this book, you will understand that plastic recycling, period, is greenwashing. There is nothing good about plastic recycling. Even if we manage to round it all up, even if we manage to get it all to a recycling facility, plastic recycling itself is a major generator of microplastic pollution. There's this idea that somehow we're going to save the planet by getting plastic out of the environment and into the economy. The economy is also part of the environment. And every time that plastic gets ground up, every time it gets put back into use, it is generating microplastics. And then we always talk about, number 1, number 2, number 4, number 5. That's just the polymers. Inside those plastic items, there are dyes, there are other chemicals, there are things that modify the quality of the plastic that are highly toxic. And then even when you get into PVC, polyvinyl chloride plastic number 5, that itself is toxic. So there is nothing about plastic recycling that is good. We need to stop thinking that it's good. And to me, the bee that's stinging the most is this idea that somehow we're doing the planet a great favor by taking single-use plastic water bottles, which contaminated the water that we drank from it. The minute the water goes into the, I guess it's when you unscrew the cap. I don't know. These analyses are getting highly technical. But then taking them and turning them into clothing. And you see ad after ad after ad, these happy, smiling people. Wow, look at my sneakers. They're made from soda bottles. Look at my shirt. It's better. My husband doesn't smell. It's just all a bunch of BS. That polyester clothing, every time it goes into the washing machine, generates nanoplastic, microplastic particles that are going out into the environment and ending up in amniotic fluid and in our brains. So I'll stop there because I could just rage on for an hour on that subject.
Kristine,
I'm a little shocked.
I'm
Delightfully so, because every conference I go to, it's all about circularity. It's all about recycling. And so that is one of our bee in our bonnets also, is that there's such a bend towards recyclability. But what about compostability? What about innovation? Are we stifling innovation because of the regulatory front, And
I one thing that you mentioned about the leaching of the chemicals into the bottle, that starts as soon as that water bottle is filled, and heat. And I mean, what it does is, when you open the bottle, the volatiles come out, but they're still in the liquid too when you're drinking it. So as soon as that bottle is filled, when it gets trucked from place to place and these non-refrigerated or even refrigerated spaces, and then you see them sitting outside gas stations, like all I can think of is that is basically a bottle of endocrine disruptors that people are buying, drinking, and it's a mess. And then the reason the circularity is so important, because it's being pushed by Big Petro. I mean, Big Petro doesn't want to give up their single-use plastic. It's their revenue stream that once we diversify our energy use, that's the one thing they can do. So there's always this push for recyclability because it's petro, plastics, beverage, packaging, the food industries. There's 10 industries that basically put almost all food on the shelves. And they're all behind it. So it's a bummer. I think we should focus on reduction. I mean, why are we using a single-use plastic water bottle? It's ridiculous, but I'll stop there.
I mean, I'll say, plastic is incredibly functional. We do owe some advancements, it does save lives. So I think eliminating plastic altogether is tough, but I think thinking about different ways to consider end of life and what does it look like to have more reuse? Like, what is true circularity? I don't think recycling is going to save us either, because what is it? Less than 9% of total global plastics are actually recycled. I mean, it's alarming, and they're ending up in our oceans. I think it was like 8 million tons. Jennifer, I think you mentioned ocean plastics, so perhaps you're the expert here, but 8 million tons of plastic are just floating around our oceans. We have continents of them. And we have no idea the long-term impact of that plastic as it relates to the oxygen producing phytoplankton in the top 12 foot of the ocean surface area. So it's an alarming issue that I think is sometimes just swept under the rug, out of sight, out of mind, right? So, but it needs addressed.
And when it comes to greenwashing, so you have an organization like ours, Recycle Hawaii, and we've been out there for 3 decades, going into the schools, showing up in policy arenas. Okay, kiddies, you want to save the planet? And the first thing that comes to people's mind is recycling. We're going to recycle. And that programming is so deep that now that we have someone here in our state that wants to set up a plastic recycling facility, and we're out there going, oh no, hell no. Sorry if I can say that word, but anyway, at the same time, we're trying to pass legislation to ban the import single-use plastics. Now that's zero waste. That is going to get us someplace. Why in the world are we bringing water from New York and Norway and Fiji to Hawaii? At the same time, we're taking our water and putting it in plastic bottles and sending it to Norway and Fiji and New York. That's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But this company that wants to set up a plastic recycling facility in our community, they want to bring 52 million pounds of plastic to our island every year and grind it up. And they're out there, recycling is great. And everybody's like, yeah, recycling is great, just jumping in. This is almost 1 billion single-use plastic water bottles. And in order for them to feed that plastic recycling scheme, we need to continue to import plastic water bottles and single-use plastic. And it's just nuts. But guess what? It is so hard for us because of all the greenwashing and the programming, the brainwashing that our organization has done over the past 30 years. Everybody's like, recycling is great, Kristine. What's wrong with you? Oh,
I can hear the passion. I can tell that these are really important issues in these conversations. I want to just kind of direct us a little bit toward what we can look out for and what choices we can make as consumers. So we've got a lot of individuals here listening to this conversation. So what are some things that we can change, that we can look out for? We can go from individual action, so things to look out for in the grocery store, for example, up to advocacy. What exactly do we need to be saying to our legislators to help make some of these changes that are needed, that we're talking about more toward reuse and away from relying on single use and recycling? Jenny, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, this one is super easy and it's an individual thing, because whenever I'm talking about plastics, people are always like, there's nothing I can do because, the industry, and I go in the store and everything's sold in it. I don't make an impact. But I can say, if you're still using single-use plastic bags and you're still drinking out of a single-use plastic bottle, you are part of the problem. So, it's easy to blame the industry, because it is. I mean, they set this up this way, greenwashed it this way, and handed it to us, and we believed it, because back in the day recycling did work. I mean, you did want to take paper and recycle it into new paper. That was what we did in the 70s, right? And so here we are here, and people think, well, it doesn't matter what I do. Meanwhile, buying cases of single-use plastic water bottles, dumping half of them out because people don't finish them. And I'm thinking, how is this even happening when it's a bottle filled of endocrine disruptors and water that was trucked from somewhere else, when 90% of the people using them, okay, maybe even 70%, have really clean water? I'll hand it off to someone else now.
I can go. So, I was thinking about just common examples of this, and I think the word natural, right? So like, this is probably the easiest one to jump on, but I'll take it. So natural, I think, is just confusing to people. You see natural labels, and then you go and read the ingredients list, and it's like, we can't even pronounce the things that are in this stuff. And so, the US, it's not super regulated and it's very open for interpretation. So I think, USDA organic indirectly covers the term natural. And they're kind of saying, like, for a product to use the organic label, it has to have at least 95% organic ingredients, which are often plant derived, but there's still a little bit of room there. So, saying all natural or natural, I think that's a pretty easy one. And ways that, people can really try to combat this would be just to really try to substantiate what you're seeing. So, like, okay, they're saying this. By what standard? What certifying entity? And I think if consumers had that mindset, I read this, but says who, and according to what association, we have to start to educate. And there are, things like how to recycle is one of them. It's a public service awareness of what to do with the packaging. There's also, different FSC, like Forest Stewardship Council, and biodegradable. I mentioned, OECD is an example of that, or OK Home OK Home Compost. I'm getting choked up on my words, which is Austria TÜV's home compostability standard. So just getting familiar with the different certifying entities and the testing standards that kind of are the requirements of those standards, I think is a good way to start.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I love that you named like specific certifications. If you want to maybe add some of those to the chat, I myself am familiar with a couple of them, but maybe like if we have any links to websites, that would be amazing just as a resource for folks. And someone else added in the chat the environmental working group that has a guide. So that's also a useful thing for consumers to use as we're evaluating these kind of greenwashing claims, whether or not it is greenwashing. Kristine?
So, as the elder in this conversation, I just want to share that, whatever we think is okay or certified in this moment could very well 10 years from now, we'd be going like, oh my God, we can't believe we ever said that was good. So what I would encourage people to do is to get back more to their intuition. I think it's really important in these discussions and in these spaces where policy is getting created and decisions are being made, that we allow Indigenous people and their wisdom to take the lead. And, I'm not waiting for scientists to prove that microplastics and amniotic fluid is bad, okay? I don't need a scientist to tell me that's bad. I just know in my guts, and I'm trusting the biological protocols in place to protect that sacred space, the same biological protocols in place to protect our brains, that just the fact that something's in there that shouldn't be is enough for me. So then you're either going to have to do a ton of research, or you're going to have to start to trust other people. And again, I think trusting, our intuition, and think about it this way. What we're really faced with is we have to create entire new systems. The systems that we have in place related to energy consumption, materials consumption, whatever, they are not working. They work for multinational corporations, but they don't work really for anybody else. And so as we create those systems, every time you decide not to buy a product that was shipped from someplace else in plastic, and now you're going to the farmer's market, and when that person at the farmer's market reaches for a plastic bag to put your apples, you say, no, please don't. Papaya is probably a better example for us here in Hawaii. But, the more we move away entirely from that system, then the more investment, the more demand we're going to create for locally produced foods, which is a good thing. That's the system that we want. So I'm at the point where if it comes in a plastic package, no thanks. I don't care if somebody comes along and says, oh, that plastic is okay because of this or that. I'm like, yeah, no, And I think that's what we have to start to do. And then I think that that's the kind of deep wisdom. 20 years from now, we'll look back and say, yeah, we made the right decision.
Kristine, I want to just touch on what you mentioned about the research and the scientists. there's articles all over the place already showing the connection. It's just every time, and if you want to know, there's the American Chemical Society. My background's chemistry. My dad was a polymer chemist. He knew that this stuff was happening. This is not, I mean, they knew that these endocrine disruptors are affecting our bodies. I mean, shoot, the 3M plant with PFAS, that when women started having babies with birth defects, they didn't stop production. They just took the women out of the lab and said, you work in the office, and now our problem solved. So everything is out there. It's just the American Chemical Society is legit. Organization's been around a long time. It's a great research group. The American Chemistry Council is petroleum's research group. So every time something comes out from the American Chemical Society, legit information, massive research, peer-reviewed, everything has been double-checked. The Chemistry Council comes out and is like, oh, well, they're wrong, and here's what we found. So keep in mind those two organizations when you're looking at research. Society, good. Chemistry Council, not trustworthy.
I'm just going to respond to that quickly because we're talking about greenwashing, and this is a very real experience I'm having right here in my community. The company, there's a company, it's called Malama One, that's being formed to set up this plastic recycling. It's started by another company, YKL Water. They take the water from our island. They're the ones putting it in the plastic bottles. I was having a conversation with the person that started that company until he cut me off and said, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, and forbid me to talk to him. And then next thing, we had a cease and desist letter against our organization for continuing to share information. But he has straight up severally sent me email messages saying, Kristine, there is no proof, no evidence that microplastics in amniotic fluid is harmful. And so whether the research is out there, I believe you entirely. He's making that claim, or at least the last time he allowed me to converse with him about this. And the average person, for them to go through that process, I'm saying, trust your guts. It's going to be good. You're going to make the right decisions.
And I think this is part of why the idea of the precautionary principle is so important, which is if you've seen our zero waste bingo on social media, if you follow us at Race to Zero Waste, you'll have read about the precautionary principle on one of our bingo cards. So if you read about that, you're able to mark that off. But of course, it's really important as far as greenwashing, making sure that things are healthy for us, for the planet. And it's something I know that's one of you mentioned Germany, I think it was you, Jenny, that European legislation is a little bit different than American legislation because European legislation tends to, not always, follow the precautionary principle a little bit more than American legislation does. And US legislation says it's fine until it's proven unhealthy, whereas you have to prove it's healthy generally in the European system before something can be put out to market. And I think that plays a role as well in greenwashing, is making sure that we can, take care of us first. But I think also this goes to, I'm pulling the threads here together. This kind of goes to the comment that Ashley made about innovation and regulation and innovation affecting each other. So I'd kind of like to maybe go down that road as well, thinking about how can we innovate in a way to get rid of greenwashing and also implement these things around the circular economy. So Ashley, do you want to make some comments toward that?
Yeah, I'll tell you why I made that comment, because I sat at a conference in London in December, and it was a small group of people involved in sustainability. It was the SPC Engage event, and they were talking about PPWR in the EU, and really that it had a bend toward recycling and recyclability. And so definitions are super important in this, right? So like, what do you qualify as recyclable? And they're basically saying, anything that's not recyclable isn't going to be permitted. And so it's like, well, hold on a second, you know, how can you stifle innovation just for the sake of what's already been done ineffectively, by the way? And so it's something that needs to be solved, especially in the flexibles industry. So single-use packaging, you know, like little granola bars and things like that, where you see, you know, I think the most ridiculous of them all is wash and dry and return to the store. I don't know anyone that's doing that. It doesn't match consumer behavior. I think that's greenwashing of a sort in some ways. I know it's progress, and I hate to be the one that, you know, kind of sticks it to somebody, because progress is better, but I think that that is kind of just an absurd, and they've actually done like air tag tracking of the store drop off plastics. It's not going anywhere towards a recycling center. It's actually going straight to the landfill, is what's just even more absurd about it. So I think there's room in the regulatory landscape to stop closing the doors for innovation for the sake of recyclability when it's really kind of proven to be a bit flawed. We've got work to do. You know, it's definitely there. It's something that we need to consider.
Thanks, Ashley. I think those are some interesting thoughts. Christina or Jennifer, did you want to respond to those?
Innovation just by itself is not necessarily the solution. We have to be innovating in the right places and in the right ways. And to me, any innovation that goes towards recycling plastic right now is a waste of time, and it's going to take resources, and it's going to take momentum away from true solutions. So, you know, what we learned by being part of the Global Plastics Treaty negotiations, the INC process, is the only solution to plastic pollution is a steep reduction in plastic production, at least 75%. So look at that huge market that's being opened up. Now, if we're going to have everybody rush in, and in all the national action plans and all the follow-up to the Global Plastics Treaty, there's going to be this massive investment in recycling made. No, that's the wrong investment. The investment should be going to new materials that actually take the place. I've seen these materials. I'm not familiar with what's been presented here today. I'm definitely going to look into it. Dissolvable, that sounds awesome. But I have been to New Light Technologies in Huntington Beach, California. They're working with PHB. I was blown away. And I think you can tell by how agitated I'm getting here that I'm, you know, a skeptic when it comes to plastic anything. But this is a plastic substitute, and I endorse it 100%. I feel like way much more energy should be put into creating those innovations. But again, a lot of that innovation is going to be not using the plastic packaging to begin with. And I do not agree that it's going to be great to have some kind of flexible packaging that's compostable when that thing is getting shipped from Mexico or whatever to my island when we have a year-round growing season. So we have to get back to making things with our own hands, making things in our own community, keeping money in our communal economy. And these are all things that are going to help. And the last thing I'll say about that is there's this whole myth of convenience around plastic. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. For all this convenience that's piling up on this side because, oh, I didn't have to wash this thing, I'm just throwing it away. This terrible inconvenience. How are we going to get microplastics out of amniotic fluid? Are we going to take every pregnant woman and plug her into something that's like a kidney dialysis machine? How convenient is that? So stop with the packaging. I don't want to innovate around packaging. We don't need packaging the way we use it now. It's just part of the wrong economic model.
Kristine,
your idea makes sense in theory. It's just the world that we live in is so, you know, very consumeristic, right? Like we buy it. We are long gone are the days of everything we have grown or produced ourselves, right? We're not Little House on the Prairie anymore. So in some ways, you know, society can't fully do that anymore. And so there are some ways that we do have to think about the scale of it. So I agree with what you're saying. I have a garden club. Like I love gardening. I grow my own stuff. I compost, you know, things like that. But is it available to everybody? These are the broader implications of that kind of thing.
I'm gonna just, this is also something I'm very passionate about. This isn't Little House on the Prairie days. This is 1979. This is 1985. This is not that long ago that we weren't completely dependent on single-use plastics for our own convenience. It is
I agree
not that
with
long ago. So whenever people are like, well, we'll never go back, we could never do that again. I'm like, wait a minute. I mean, I'm not that old. I mean, relatively speaking, to think that that was some foreign thing that we did. We had deposit return schemes. The plastics industry got rid of that intentionally so that they could continue this single-use action. Even at the same time, they knew it was not economically feasible to recycle it. The deposit returns scheme it works, right? You have it in Hawaii. Hawaii is like the #1 system, perfect system, because you're a closed loop on your islands. But it's just whenever we keep thinking about, well, let's innovate for new products to replace that for our own convenience. It just seems like every issue we have related to climate change, related to too much waste, is based on human convenience, and that's it. And somehow we think that we need to continue innovating so that we don't have to get off our lazy butts and actually do something. And I think that's just, it's ridiculous. And I don't think that we should be sticking with that and saying, well, this is all we can do, because this is how humanity is.
And this
I
is not
think
about Little
it's a
House
good
on the
mix,
Prairie.
right?
This is about Little House on the Prairie just got devastated because Hurricane Milton came in and blew it away. This is about an epidemic of obesity and asthma. And there are direct connections between obesity and asthma and these horrible conditions that we are being plagued with, and plastic pollution. You act as if we're going to have the luxury of like, oh, well, we don't want to do that, because this is in the era of climate change, in the era of all of these health epidemics. We don't have a choice. We have to change. That system has failed us, and that system has to go away. And so we have to find ways to do that and take the first steps.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I'm just suggesting it's already here. And so it's like an upstream battle. I don't know that you're going to get the wide scale adoption that it was before this all came. And so I think we do have to find ways to reduce. We do have to find ways to all be a little bit more educated on what it means to have one planet. Like, that's it. Like, there's no spaceship waiting for us once we destroy this place. We have certainly exchanged some of this, our souls, for convenience. It's true.
Yeah, and related to that, I'm going to continue to guide us a little bit into the solutions aspect, because I think we could all go for a long time about what's wrong with the world. And so what I want to get to is, what can we do, to continue to build in the right direction, to continue to innovate in the right direction. So maybe we can talk a little bit about third-party certifications, verifying these claims, things that are more reliable, or ways that we can get to a world where greenwashing is not such a danger for consumers. Kristine, do you want to go?
I'm still in that last conversation. And the point I wanted to make there was that we don't have options. A lot of the options are gone. We have to change. We don't have a choice. So then again, the question is, how do we do that? What does that future look like? And then maybe are third-party certifications part of that future? Third-party certifications are part of that future. But again, I want to encourage people to start to uplift Indigenous people, to uplift fence line communities, people who live next to the places where our imagined innovation is going to, set up. Listen to people like me in my community when I'm saying, no, please don't bring that plastic recycling facility here. We don't want the microplastic pollution, because that's where the reality, the greenwashing all aside, whoever's being directly impacted by your so-called innovation or your greenwashed manufacturing, those are the people we need to uplift and talk to them and say, hey, is this for real or not? And then in our own lives, there's that whole thing around the crying Indian and how much that impacted us. Like, oh, this is all of our responsibility. And now we're pushing against that and saying, no, corporations have to take responsibility. We all have to take responsibility, you know? So I don't want to preclude the idea that you could in your home, but, you know, I stay away from plastic as much as I can. And I have my grandchildren come and they like hold up things and they go, oh, is this plastic or not? You know, creating awareness. There is so much you can do in your life to not use plastic and then to be that person in the world, you know, in that moment when someone offers you a sticker and it's like a, you know, a high profile environmental organization sticker and you want to promote them, say, no, that sticker is plastic. No, thank you. And then the awareness builds. The last thing I'll say, everybody has to, I wish I still had a copy of it, but I've been giving them out left and right. Everybody needs to read Matt Simon's book, Poison Like No Other. Once you read that book, you're going to be as adamant as I am against plastic recycling, against plastic usage. Just read it.
I
It'll
think
change.
we've gotten a lot into the plastics issue, and it's a huge issue, and especially now with the INC negotiations going on. But greenwashing can happen in other areas. So maybe that's something that we can touch on as well. I know that Smart Solves products, for example, touch on the flushability issue, and wipes, for example, have been a huge issue for sewer systems where things get clogged up because some package says flushable and it's not dissolving and it's not breaking apart. And those are huge issues as well that are related to greenwashing. So, you know, for the audience, like, you might have an idea of something that, you know, you think is greenwashing. And I just want everyone to be aware that it's not just about plastics and it's not just about the fossil fuel industry. There are also other things that are happening in the greenwashing space that we could watch out for as well. So if you have any ideas of those and would like to put those in the comments, please feel free. We'll ask about those too.
But since you talked about Smart Solve and flushability, maybe I can leap off of that. Yes, you know, Kimberly-Clark has given us a little bit of a bad name with the class action lawsuit with flushable wipes, which turned out maybe to not be so flushable. And so, you know, one of the things that's hard is I've talked to people on both sides of this. So let's talk about flushability for a hot second. It's a weird topic for a middle, 30-something-year-old girl to know a lot about, but let's talk flushability. So there's a couple of different standards. So INDA is the Nonwoven Association. They kind of represent the manufacturing side, like the toilet paper companies, the wipes companies, right? They have a testing criteria. It's called the FG 502 series, and it looks at household settling pump, slashbox disintegration, municipal sewage pump, all of that. That has recently come under scrutiny a little bit because some of these flushable wipes, you know, allegedly had passed that. Now there's another standard that comes up, and now guess who's behind this? So it's not the brand owners and the manufacturers, it's actually the municipalities. So the people that are responsible for the infrastructure of our drains and all of that. And so that standard is called IWSFG. And so, you know, I think what it comes down to is it would be really great if there was something like how there's a FSC or a USDA symbol. You know, we have to have agreeing entities, everybody agreeing what does it look like to use our drains as a possible end of life scenario for these products. Because what's happening is, you know, there's not that symbol right now. They actually removed it because there was some debate about that. And so I think from our perspective, our materials pass both tests. And so we're pretty agnostic. We're like, just tell us what the test is. In fact, our materials are thinner than toilet paper in a micron perspective, and they perform very similar. They're able to hold ink. We're working on barrier properties, which still allows them to disperse and go down the drains. So it's perfectly suited for applications like tampons, you know, fem care. So I think there's a lot of room for interpretation, unfortunately, right now with flushability, but it always comes down to the standards. My diatribe on flushability is done.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting to get into like kind of the scientific approach behind like how do you pass a certification and things like that. So for folks who want to look into that, Stephanie from our team has linked the International Water Services Flushability group in the chat on Zoom, and we'll also include that on YouTube. But that's something to look into, like how do we get these certifications in place? What do they look like? And are they verifiable? And I think that's going to be part of a future where we have less greenwashing. Jenny, did you want to make a comment?
I really don't know enough about certifications and that type of thing. But I do know the number one thing everyone can do is reduce. And I'm thinking about dry cleaning right now because dry cleaning chemicals are known carcinogens. They're trichloro and tetrachloroethylene, and it's really bad, right? And so dry cleaners use that for years. And so instead of telling dry cleaners you can't use it anymore, they said dry cleaners, you have to pay a fee toward cleanup if you are using it. Well, that worked for a while until people stopped using it, which thankfully people have, but now there's no money to cover the cleanup that's associated with all these dry cleaners going out there. I don't dry clean my clothes. If something has to be dry cleaned, I am not wearing it. So it's just that kind of a, if you walk into any service and it smells like chemicals, you probably shouldn't be doing that. That's really just don't. Just reduce it. Just stop. Just say no.
That's definitely a good principle to follow. Kristine?
Yeah, I like that because it goes back to the intuitive third-party certification, like use your intuition as that certification. So I think that I did warn you at the beginning I was going to be like plastic focused. So thanks for turning that around. And I think it's important to make sure that we don't only apply concerns about greenwashing to a specific characteristic or functionality of a product and say, okay, well, we're concerned about flushability as an example. So now are we greenwashing on flushability? We have to also look at how are the materials made to produce that thing, whether it's flushable or not, is that having an impact on the environment? And then again, this continually brings us back to the people that live next to the place where that wipe gets made or the fibers to make it get harvested. Because as an example, in our push against plastic, we're advocating for using fiber. And we're so excited because we're taking cardboard and we're shredding it and we're turning it into mulch. Isn't that a great thing? Well, until you talk to the people that live next to the place where the cardboard gets made. And it's a really polluting industry. So again, in this greenwashing, don't just focus on, one specific deliverable that a product is meant to bring to market. You have to look at the entire product, and then also things like, to what extent is the money for that product being sucked out of the economy? So, in where we live in Hawaii, everything is imported. Every time we go down to the store to buy something, that all gets sucked out of our economy. And that money is not there to support true solutions around reduction, local food production, or even reuse infrastructure.
And actually, everything that you're talking about, Kristine, goes to a comment that has come from our YouTube audience, which is a question about what's being done to get environmental justice aspects involved in this greenwashing issue to make sure that we're addressing these aspects that you're talking about of the communities that are near the production facilities or the extraction sites and things like that. So I think that's a great question. I don't know if Ashley or Jenny, you want to touch on those environmental justice issues as well.
I can touch on it a little bit just based on our work in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the beginning of Cancer Alley down there. So, Baton Rouge is basically ExxonMobil. And in fact, ExxonMobil is they're bragging about building an advanced recycling plant that's going to solve plastics. And it is just it just breaks my heart because the articles, they're putting $7.2 billion in this advanced recycling plant in an underserved community adjacent to ExxonMobil currently. And so, and I asked the question to ExxonMobil, I said, what if you put $7.2 billion into those communities? Like, think about what that could do for those communities that are on the front lines. What could be done then? How about you put $7.2 billion into reuse within those communities? You know, they don't want to do that because then it doesn't bring money in. But I mean, the only thing that I can say about it is what I try to do personally and what MRCTI is we really build that trust within the community. I work directly with the community members. And then there's always somebody within the community that's already working on this, that's already somewhat championing it. And so it's just getting those resources to those champions and letting them do what they do best within their own communities. Because if I go to a community and be like, this is all lies, they're like, well, how do we don't even know who you are. I mean, but you know, trying to build up the community members and provide resources to them, I think is the best way to go.
Ashley, did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I was just in Louisiana, New Orleans this year, and it was kind of hard. I did the Cancer Alley tour on a bicycle, and I'm trying to remember something brigade. There's the name of a group, and they are trying to just create awareness around it because it is impacting those communities. And it's really hard to see. And actually, on our bike ride, it was a little hard to breathe. Like it's strange. Like you can feel it in the atmosphere. And so that was pretty eye-opening for me. You know, I don't know what the solution is. I think it's hard because wherever like society, this is, I think, just a debate, and I'd love to hear it. And it's just a hard topic, but it's like, what is the solution truly? And we have to be realistic, right? So, you know, do you continue to create plastics, and what does that look like? And how can we do it in a better way if we're going to do that? But also, how do we reduce? You know, how can we continue to serve the planet and do things a little bit better than we've been doing in the past? So it's challenging because all of us reap the benefits every day of plastic, whether you want to admit it or not, right? Like our cars are made, there's plastic in them. Like everything that we have, the comforts of us today, a lot of it is attributed to kind of the industry, if you will. And so no one wants to live next to industry. That's what's heart-wrenching. So that's my own struggle with the topic.
I think one thing though that gets mixed in is that I'm talking about single-use plastics. I'm not
Sure.
talking about my phone. And so every time I say we need to reduce single-use plastics, people are like, but what about medicine? What about hospitals? I'm like,
Sure.
I
No,
am
it's a good
not at
example.
all talking about the things that are saving people's lives or making our cars lighter and that we continue using on a daily basis. I'm talking about that bottle that you use for 12 minutes and maybe or maybe not finish it before you throw it in
Agreed.
the trash.
No, I appreciate you saying that. It's an important distinction.
I'm talking about those plastics. Read the book. You'll talk about them too.
All right, we're all gonna read the book and then we'll come back for book club and we'll have a conversation about it. Let's schedule it. For the last 4 minutes that we have, I just want to pull a couple of the questions that I see in the Zoom chat here. So we have a couple of questions about like whether a specific thing is greenwashing. So one of the questions is about pyrolysis, biochar, which is a carbon sequestration method, and also bamboo toilet paper, whether it's greenwashing compared to you know, tree toilet paper. So if you have thoughts about biochar or about TP, let us know. Although one of the comments says that bidets are a possible solution to toilet paper.
What they do in Europe.
We don't even have to think about it.
Well,
So any thoughts on like, either of those?
Go ahead, Jen.
I'll talk a little bit about biochar, and I really don't know a whole lot. I'm not going to pretend like I do, but just going back to my organic chemistry, working in the lab days and doing any kind of extraction process, I don't know a single extraction solvent that isn't toxic. So whatever they're doing in the process, which is usually proprietary, most likely includes using some other toxic chemicals that have to be disposed of that aren't going to just go away without harming somebody. So I would say we need to learn more about those chemicals, because I've asked the same question about advanced recycling and everyone's like, oh, we can't tell you it's proprietary. I'm like, I already know that if you're breaking down an organic molecule, you are using a solvent that is on a priority list as a toxic compound.
So I'm going to continue to say that we could be more fundamental in our analysis of whether or not something is greenwashing. And anything time you talk about something at scale, there's a good chance there's going to be some greenwashing going on, because you have to, there's going to be concentrated impacts. And so just get more fundamental, and don't go along with this idea that anything that continues to stoke the consumption cycle is greenwashing, period. We cannot continue to consume resources at the level that we're doing it, even if the chemicals we use are a little different or the materials we use are a little different. Period, short stop. We cannot continue to consume all the resources on this planet. We're killing the planet, we're killing ourselves. So if it stokes the production cycle, if it makes it easier for us to consume more or allows us to continue consuming at the same rate, it's greenwashing.
Ashley, did you want to take on either of those?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the sequestration, and I don't know anything about the biochar, but I do know that, just thinking about fiber-based content and virgin wood pulp versus PCW. One thing to consider is really the faster sequestration of younger trees compared to older trees. So the fact that we're planting new trees is actually better for the environment, because it's proven that younger trees sequester carbon at a faster rate. So just think about that. I know a lot of people are like, oh, you're killing the forest, but it's like, I think there are ways to do it responsibly, especially looking for that FSC logo, because that means for every tree that's taken down, another's put in place. So just be thinking about that.
Yeah, it's specifically good for the environment when related to carbon sequestration. Definitely. We want to keep our old growth forests as much as possible.
Oh, trust me, I am a tree hugger through and through.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, the replanting is definitely a factor. So we are at time right now. So for those of you who are able to stay on for maybe another 2 minutes, I just want to give 30 seconds to each of our speakers for them to share maybe one last thought, or the one thing that every individual can do to make a difference for Zero Waste Month. And as you take those zero waste actions, make sure that you share with our hashtag Zero Waste Month, share what you learned on this call. And we hope to see you on the next one. And I'm going to hand it over to Kristine for 30 seconds to give her last couple of thoughts, or one thought.
Uplift Indigenous people and fence line community members in all of these conversations. Let's give them the lead. Let's follow their lead and do what we can to be in service to the traditional wisdom that kept our planet alive for millennia.
Thank you, Kristine. And Jenny?
Yeah, a couple things. Number one, think about something before you buy it and before you use it. I have folks in my office here, my engineering firm, that they're like, is this what you think about every time you buy something? I'm like, well, yeah, of course. Like, what am I going to do with all of this waste? And then second of all, talk to your local government. And the reason I say that is I work for an association of mayors along the Mississippi River. That's where the action is going to ultimately happen, whether it's regulation or whether it's contract modifications, whether it's ordinance modifications. That is where ultimately change is going to happen, because that's where these systems reside. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ashley?
Yeah, I think maybe just do a little self-reflection and think about the way that you live your life and how you spend your money and with whom you spend your money. And are there things that you could cut back on to reduce? Are there things that you could do to maybe grow your own? Are there things that you could do to just not consume as much? Do we have to be such a consumeristic society? And so I think those are all, and go thrift shopping. It's really fun, reuse, think about those things. So, and give life to brands, and your money to brands that are actually living out their brand promises and their commitments, their public commitments for sustainability. This is hard stuff. Sometimes these top-down mandates, that sometimes the supply is not always there or the innovation's there. So I think there is grace for brands where they're like, ooh, we got to punt a little. I get that. It's frustrating. But I would say be selective in where you decide to spend your money, especially with companies that are out there, like that are just doing really good things and being super forthright. I think of companies like Grove Collaborative, and things like that, where they're doing right. And so the flushable tampon, a customer of ours, Day, just really focusing on women's health and zero waste for tampons. There are really cool products out there. You just kind of have to, unfortunately, you have to look a little harder because the mainstream stuff's in the way. So just do your homework on looking up and into these things.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo that. And if you find a new product, if you can replace one thing by being thoughtful about one thing that you usually buy, then that's okay for this year, for this month, right? You don't have to do it all at once. So don't get overwhelmed, right? These are the changes that we make over time, which is why we have Zero Waste Month every year. So you can make like at least one change this year, maybe another change next year. And hopefully maybe month after month, as fast or slow as you want, but try not to get overwhelmed, because I know having like all the consumer items and advertising and everything in our face constantly can get overwhelming. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows you have some grace, but keep working at it and keep advocating. The journey to zero waste is a marathon, right? And so we're trucking along bit by bit, and we're going to keep going, and we're going to watch out for greenwashing. So thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us for a couple of minutes over the hour. We appreciate the conversation so much. Please join us next Thursday for the next conversation. We'll be talking about e-waste, I believe, is the next conversation. So that one should be just as interesting, just as passionate. We have a couple of great people who are going to join us for that one. Remember to post your actions with hashtag Zero Waste Month. And thank you so much, everyone who joined us. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. Aloha.
Thank you.